this episode, I speak with Rosalind McCallard. Key points addressed were the particulars of her vegan sandwich and snack company called Snackrilege, and the particulars of launching and growing a vegan food company over the past 6 years. We also discussed Rosalind's personal vegan story and the Portland community she thrives and contributes to. Stay tuned for my fascinating talk with Rosalind McCallard. Hi, I'm Patricia, and this is Investigating Vegan Life with Patricia Kathleen. This series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from food and fashion to tech and agriculture, from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas. Our inquiry is an effort to examine the variety of industries and lifestyle tenets in the world of vegan life. To that end, we will cover topics that have revealed themselves as common and integral when exploring veganism. The dialogue captured here is part of our ongoing effort to host transparent and honest rhetoric for those of you who, like myself, find great value in hearing the expertise and opinions of individuals who have dedicated their work and lives to their ideals. You can find information about myself and my podcast at patriciakathleen.com. Welcome to Investigating Vegan Life. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone and welcome back. I'm your host Patricia, and today I'm so excited to be sitting down with Rosalind McCallard. Rosalind is the founder of Snackrilege. You can find out more about the company we talk about today and all of her efforts on www.snackrilege.com. I'll have Rosalind drop in any other social handles as I welcome her. Welcome, Rosalind.
Oh, thank you so much, Patricia Kathleen, for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And you can find us on Instagram at Snackrilege Vegan Foods, and Snackrilege Foods Portland is Facebook. I didn't quite have my ducks in a row on what I was going to call ourselves when we first started. So pretty much search Snackrilege Portland, though, and you'll find us.
I love it. Yeah. And the name is, I think if you search it, you're going to find the Twitter as well. You guys are on Twitter at Snackrilege. So I feel like if you search it, you're going to come up with your social media handle. Absolutely. So for anyone who's new to the podcast, I will read a brief bio on Rosalind. But prior to doing that, I'd like to proffer up a quick roadmap for the trajectory in which today's podcast inquiry will come from. I'll first, as I said, read a bio on Rosalind, and then I'll start asking her to unpack her personal vegan story. And she's quite the tenure with vegan and vegetarianism. I'll have her unpack a little bit of that as it pertains to the platform that we'll talk about today and how it relates to her company. Then we'll turn to defining key terms that a lot of people in the vegan industry use differently, starting with the rote and then getting into the more complex. And then we'll wrap everything up with rapid fire questions that we've taken from most of you who've written in and asked for specific lines of inquiry for people in the industry that Rosalind is in as it pertains to the vegan communities. So as promised, a quick bio on Rosalind before I start peppering her with questions. Rosalind McCallard founded Snackrilege in 2014 with her husband Clayton McCallard. With a love of heavy metal puns and the hope of making the vegan sandwich option the easiest, tastiest option. Rosalind has been vegetarian for over 30 years and vegan consistently since 2008. Snackrilege has raised thousands of dollars for sanctuaries in Portland, in the Portland area through parties, raffles, and fundraisers. Rosalind is an active member of the Main Street Alliance and is currently a member of Commissioner Joanne Hardesty's Business Council. Rosalind and Clayton have both spoken at various VegFests and other events, and Rosalind has presented on councils, panels, and committees on her experience starting a business from the ground up. Snackrilege sandwiches are currently in stores in 5 states. Snackrilege also operates the only 100% vegan commissary kitchen in Portland that provides affordable kitchen space to small vegan businesses with an emphasis on BIPOC and BIPOC and women-owned companies. So, Rosalind, just starting off, I want you to kind of unpack. I don't know why I'm not really. What is BIPOC? BIPOC.
It's indigenous. That's actually I don't know off the top of my head. Because could we edit this part?
Yeah,
possibly.
No problem.
I know it stands for people of color, indigenous, and I don't remember what the B stands for.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. And I
Oh,
can look
that's
into
oh,
it
that I
as
should
well.
have looked that up. It just drew a blank right now. It's
I don't
indigenous
normally ask
people.
people to define their acronyms.
No,
So,
no, it's that's so embarrassing. I'm totally blushing right now. It's embarrassing. What does the B stand for? But indigenous people of color, but I don't remember the B. Oh, so
okay.
but that's basically a focus on traditionally underrepresented groups, especially in food service, because if you really look at the top chefs and the people who are sort of the rock stars in the culinary world, they're typically white men. And
Mhm.
women do a lot of the grunt work, they do a lot of the labor in the kitchen. You go into a kitchen, it's frequently staffed with women and people of color, but they're not the ones getting the accolades. They're not the ones getting the star treatment. And so we really wanted to start our commissary with the idea of providing an affordable space for women,
Yeah.
for people of color who would maybe have a harder time securing traditional loans and finding spaces and really create a community where people felt safe and could launch themselves into that next level and give them an equal shot at that kind of trophy rather than
Yeah.
cool, you're going to be the dishwasher forever. Like
Right.
everybody deserves an equal playing field. So that was kind of the idea
Absolutely.
behind the commissary.
So I'm hoping you can kind of unpack a little bit. I know that you have kind of this history with this 30-year history with
Yeah.
vegetarianism and veganism, kind of dabbling in and out of that, which happens, I find, with a lot of vegans. They've kind of danced with it for a myriad of years before actually
Yes.
fully committing. Can you tell us a little bit about your own personal vegan story as it pertains to your life and also sacrilege?
Sure.
Snackrilege.
Sure. Thank you. So I first went vegetarian when I was 11, which was 1986. Um, and or was it 87? Regardless, when I was 11, and the idea, I just didn't want to eat animals anymore. I thought it was weird. Um, I didn't understand it. My mother was super supportive. I didn't really like vegetables or know how to cook, so I ate a lot of bagels. I know I was sort of back and forth eating seafood there for a few years at the beginning. Um, and then in high school, I really started getting more into punk rock and feminism and anarchist culture and reading cookbooks like Soy Not Oy and learning more about how that veganism as a movement that really strives to liberate not only animals but liberate people as well, liberate our own personal health, liberate the chains that are placed on us by this really backwards food system that's not good for the planet or ourselves, never mind animal rights, and animal rights as
Yeah.
the main impetus for everything we do. I get really emotional talking about it because I can't imagine inflicting the what we do to animals in factory farms. I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And
Mm.
figure of speech, I don't think I actually have a worst enemy. Although I was reading an article that said you should get a nemesis. I don't have one. It's on my list of things to do. So I wouldn't wish this treatment. And we have this absolute dichotomy of treating our dogs with and cats with this reverence, and then
Mhm.
treating other animals with such contempt and looking at them as usage. And when that really sort of, I started critically thinking about that when I was a teenager, I went vegan. But I loved cheese, and this was the 90s, and I didn't really know how to make cheese, and there was not the options we had now. I mean, there was
Right.
Toby's tofu pate out of Eugene. They've been around forever, and they were one of the first kind of vegan spreads and pates, but there just wasn't the options we
No.
have.
Yeah.
So, I just basically went back and forth, vegan, vegetarian for a long time, and finally, my husband and I got together 13 years ago, and we've been together about 6 months, and we were talking. We were eating a Domino's pizza and watching an undercover Mercy for Animals video, and
Mm.
looked at the video and what was happening to those beautiful innocent creatures, and looked at the pizza, which was frankly disgusting, and said this, there's no moral justification for doing what we're doing, especially not for this garbage. And so we just went
Right.
vegan. Yeah, and have been
I'm
ever since.
So how much did you've told me kind of off the air and in a piece of your bio I didn't read that you knew very little about business. So what kind of launched you into Snackrilege? Like where did the idea come from, the concept of starting. I mean the vegan sandwich is like a lifesaver and a revolutionary moment for me. When I see like a vegan
Yeah.
sandwich cart, I immediately have this like overflow of love. Yeah, I feel like it's this
Right?
gateway drug for everyone who
It's the
needs to try the
best.
vegan industry. But
Yeah.
what inspired you to do it? And were you nervous about going into it not knowing anything about business and or vegan business, which is a completely different beast as well?
It's a great question. I think it was better that I didn't know anything about business because I mean, I wish I made a lot of mistakes and I'm always happy to sort of share the knowledge I've gained from those mistakes with other people. I think if I'd known more, I might have been more scared, but I just didn't know enough to be nervous. I was like,
Yeah.
we're going to do this. I graduated from college in my mid 30s and I expected to have this sort of glamorous, exciting career. And that wasn't happening. Uh, and so one day I just said, you know what? What do I know how to do? I know how to make good vegan food. I love sandwiches. And what's the most important thing to me is it's veganism. And my husband actually talked about starting a vending machine called Snackrilege at his work
Huh.
years ago. And that never happened. So I just decided, let's do it. And just kind of dove feet first into the project. And excuse me. And really just took it from there. We're lucky here in Portland to have Mercy Corps Northwest, which is the primary focus for Mercy Corps Northwest is small businesses. So they provide grants and loans and training and counseling. Um, I think it's primarily to businesses in the Willamette Valley. I don't know
Hmm.
that they've ever sort of branched beyond that, but it's a wonderful resource. And they make you take the classes before they'll give you any
Nice.
money. So
Yeah.
it's really they don't just hand you a check and say good luck. So it's a really good program. So I'd known people that had enrolled in that, and so I enrolled and took the courses and borrowed the money and just kind of started boots on the ground cold calling people. Unfortunately, I've lived in Portland and for years and worked in the food service industry, so I knew a lot of people that worked in grocery stores and restaurants, and so I just kind of
Yeah.
started calling them and saying, hey, veganism is on the rise. You guys want to try my sandwiches? They're good
Yeah.
sandwiches. I need to mail you some. Actually, remember I can get your address and ship you some before this is over. So
You bet. Absolutely. I well, the cool thing about Portland, it must be said, with no bias aside, though I do have an incredible bias, but the community is very different there, especially within businesses. You know, you live there
yes.
for a series of years, let alone as long as you have, and
Yeah,
it's that tight knit community, right? It's not like too small
very
towny,
much.
but it's also like there's more correspondence I find between,
Hmm.
even disparate, like, industries. Like, someone in the food
Yes,
business would know somebody who also does pottery. Like, there's more, like, togetherness in that. I don't know if it's the
yeah.
more festivals or fairs prior to COVID, but, like, there was something about Portland
There's a
where
lot.
I
Yeah.
was speaking to someone in one industry, like an academic who knew very well, the owner of like Powell's, or I don't even know. It's just like all of these different things
Yes.
that people would know. So I like that for the industry and it helps small businesses a ton. I want to start unpacking really quickly before we get too much further into talking about Snackrilege, because I've got a bunch of questions kind of related to the products you choose.
Cool.
But
Yeah.
before we do that, I'm hoping we can start unpacking some terms. And these are just how, if I said this, on a public street corner with you, what that term would mean to you. It's not
Okay.
necessarily the actual dictionary definition of it, but rather how you define it in your own head so we can get the
Hmm.
premise of where you're coming from in your platform.
Yeah.
So, how do you define vegan? When someone uses that term, what does that term mean to you?
I think of vegans, vegan versus, well, I know you're going to talk about plant based in a minute, so I'll stick to vegan. Veganism is um, an ethical set of morals and guidelines that determine what your actions are in relation to the world around you, specifically with an onus on animal rights.
Mm, okay. So it's an ethical guidelines with an emphasis towards animals. Okay, and
Yes.
then yeah, then the next one is plant based, and I'm hoping you can define it just on its own, and then in
Sure.
relationship to veganism.
Sure. So plant based is more dietary. I still very much support people who are eating plant based, but it's a dietary choice done more for personal health or perhaps environmental reasons, but it's more dietary specific. When I think of veganism, I think of animal activism. I think of raising money for sanctuaries. I think of not wearing leather, not wearing honey. When you're plant based, that refers more to your diet, and typically that's done for more personal reasons rather than I don't, and not selfish by any means, but personal reasons rather than the connection with the world around you, for example, the environment or animal rights.
Absolutely. And what about whole foods? How do you define that?
Not processed foods, which is too bad because I love processed foods. Especially now, there's so many good vegan ones. You can go to Target and get Morningstar Farms vegan pizza poppers. I mean, come on, what a world! But but Whole Foods would be grains and vegetables and nuts, and really eating that unprocessed diet. So I'm trying to eat more of that because it's a little bit better for you. But and I love vegan
Do you
food.
Yeah, right. Do you get into with the Whole Foods, do you have, like, cutoffs? A lot of people have this clarity around Whole Foods where it's like, when you say processed, even that word, like, is it unheated or is it just something that it still delivers in its like, olive oil is not a whole food in that sense. It's processed to extract it. Like, do you have, like, hard and fast definitions, or is it just kind of like anything that hasn't been sent to a factory to be made?
It would be when I think Whole Foods would be anything exactly that hasn't been sent to a factory, that doesn't have the binders, the gums, the chemicals, that wasn't created in a lab. Olive oil, come on, that's a whole food. That's good for you. That's, yes, it's processed, but it's not. You're not
Right.
adding a bunch of. You look at the ingredients list and it says olive oil and maybe a little salt or whatever herbs, but depending on what you're getting. But Whole Foods is, it's pronounceable ingredients, I guess, would be the easiest way to define it. And
Nice.
I
Yeah.
don't personally think of I don't think of animals as food. That's my definition. But I do feel like a lot of people, when you say Whole Foods, they think organic, non-GMO, but they also think of chicken and fish as part of
Right.
this whole food. And that's, so I typically try to stay away from that kind of language, especially because our a lot of our products are could be considered whole foods. We make our seitan in house. We make our sauces in house. Some of them do have follow your heart cheeses. Oh, I guess they mostly have follow your heart veganese, but they still, I'm not gonna lie and say they're healthy. They're not. They're tasty, but they're, if you're going for a healthy vegan snack, probably shouldn't grab one of our sandwiches, or maybe just eat like a third of one. Uh, but I don't think I think of Whole Foods as less connected to veganism and plant based, and more
Yeah.
connected to trying to eat healthy.
Absolutely, and I kind of wanna get into that because I love that you owned it. I was just talking with, a venture capitalist, not 2 days ago on air, and he was saying, they shot themselves in the foot. I think it was Impossible Burger, and they said they had this option to just say it's environmentally responsible, and they chose to go the other route and say it's healthy, and they're kind of being beaten up in the press right now about, like,
Yeah.
it's very the health argument is, like, not as powerful as compared to meat, because
Hmm.
it's filled with a lot of things that a lot of doctors would say, "That's not the greatest thing, you shouldn't eat it, like, 9 days a week," but the argument of the environment and things like that and kind of going towards, responsibility and humanitarian reasons and things like that was a more powerful argument, so I like that you kind of are really owning what you're doing with your business, but I wanna stay on this really quickly. These are key terms that people are throwing around a lot, and I'm not sure if you've heard them or used them, but I do wanna get through it.
Sure.
Greenwashing and humane washing. Have you used those? Have you read them? And if so, how do you define them?
I definitely have. I haven't. I don't know if I've used them. I mean, greenwashing, I probably have in casual conversation, not in any of my writings or talks or podcasts or interviews. But I've definitely used that term in casual conversation, and that's really prevalent. That's trying to say, so everything is. I mean, Metamucil right now is slapping the words plant based. I think Metamucil's
Mhm.
been around forever, but now they're trying to sort of get these trendy buzzwords to make their product seem more hip and more responsible and more aware and more relevant than it. I mean, I'm not bashing Metamucil. That's just the one that pops up, I don't know, for some reason on my Hulu all the time, or NPR or whatever. Um, and so I think people really do sort of latch onto these terms without having any real substance behind it. And it's so easy to do because there's not a lot of regulation when it comes to terminology and labeling. You could say natural and it doesn't, as far as I know, you can pretty much call anything natural. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something I've had to really look into because our products are natural. But what does that even mean? And so that's a prime example of greenwashing. And humane washing. I've never heard that, but it's pretty obvious what it means.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that is a great way of putting that. Oh, don't worry. It's the Foster Farms chicken ad that makes me scream every time I see it, of the dancing chicken saying, "I'm stepping out." And it's got this clever little song and it shows these cute chickens and they're in the field and they're
Yeah.
doing a little chicken head dance. That is humane washing. that leads people to believe that it's okay to eat these chickens. And then if you see the trucks on the highway, which there's a chicken processing place down the road from my house, and there's chicken farms down the other, so I see them all day long. These poor chickens crammed. There's nobody dancing. There's no fun disco music. These chickens are miserable and suffering and dying, and it all weather, all climates, cold, hot. But people want to believe that they can justify bad behavior. And I don't bad because it's not like I'm pointing fingers, and I'm not, but they can justify behavior that they in their hearts know maybe isn't the best course of action, because they've been told by these ads that, don't worry, look how happy these guys are. Look, they're dancing around. And I've had people say that to me before. A former coworker years ago said, oh, but I only buy the milk with the happy cow on the box. And I said, well, by that logic, then I should look like an 18-year-old supermodel every time I dye my hair. Like, if we're going by what's on the box, come on.
Right.
You can't, it's marketing. That doesn't have anything to do with reality. And she was kind of stunned. She said, you mean they're not, if I'm buying the happy cow milk, the cows aren't necessarily happy? I said, no. So it was eye-opening for me to actually have a conversation with somebody who so fully believed the hype. I'm like, wow, this is who people are marketing to, I guess. But she's very nice, and it was nice to have that, because I think she actually probably changed her behavior a little bit after that conversation. So
I never met anyone who was happy after theft. And that's really all it is, you know. Like, you've never met someone who's like, I'm just so glad my car was broken into, everything's stolen, like, and that's just what it is. This idea that there's like an equal relationship between, you know, what we're grabbing from someone and what they're and it being an animal or even a person, I think it's just so obvious. And I was that person in my 20s. The second I hit my first high paying job, and I was like rolling, I went out and I got like the free range chicken eggs, you know, with like the whole on free range. I didn't even know how to define that, but I was at Whole Foods and I was killing it. I was going to pay 3 times as much, and all of those chickens were totally miserable. I mean, I think the intention is great when people are there. I think they're on their way to actually becoming really humane consumers. But yeah, I think that humane washing, I actually got that term from the conversation I had with Ingrid Newkirk.
Then I have heard it before.
So, well, and I hadn't heard, like, I made sense as I heard it. As you said, you can kind of put it together, but I think it's being used more and more to kind of also exemplify, you know, that I think the environmental aspect gets spoken of a great deal. And as the founder of PETA and an animal rights activist, she's very much so into the idea of like, it's being used on the humane part as well. Like, we keep like washing over these, like, we're being gentle with these, and there's no gentility to even the nicest of farms, you know, and enslaving and taking someone's product just isn't kind.
It is, and having the fact that even if you treat them decently, there's still the the calves get slaughtered. There's a Odd Man Inn is a sanctuary up here, and they have a couple of male cows that they frequently take down or not just for this purpose, but when they go to OSU rather, Oregon State University, the students there are shocked because they're so unused to seeing adult male cows. They just don't. It's not something that they see because they don't ever make it. They get killed, and so they're always happy to sort of have that. The Odd Man Inn folks, Wendy and Josh, they're always happy to sort of have that education be a part of the component of not only getting treatment for their animals. You know, they're not just taking them down there just to have the students look at them by any means, but if they need to go down there anyway for whatever reason, it's an added bonus that students get to be aware that male calves aren't being treated kindly and living out their best life. They're being stolen from their mothers. And I think that's a great analogy about the car. That's sadly funny. Really funny.
Theft on any level. It's just like, no one's ever going to be happy about that. I'm curious when you go to choose your foods. So I've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of vegan restaurant owners, a lot of vegan snack makers and different, I spoke with someone who has a space ice cream that's vegan, the only one in the world. And all of these people, there's a very specific kind of tenor with how you choose what you're going to eat. And you mentioned early on, you know, becoming vegan or looking at vegan products in like the 90s. I would say even the early aughts, vegan cheese was straight up not cheese or even a real product until they got it straight. And like, I don't think I saw anything that tasted even remotely okay until 2006. You know, it was just like, it wasn't around. And when it was weird. It didn't melt. I think the Greeks are the ones that solved it. I had the best vegan cheese experience in 2008 when I was in Ireland, and it had come up from Greece and it wasn't even sold in the States yet. And I was like, why are they getting this so well? And it's because it was olive oil and coconut oil based. And they finally got the whole idea about it should be melting. Anyway, this is a whole tangent to kind of point out that
please
when
talk
you
more
get
about
into
cheese. That's
food,
great.
I know. When you get into foods, it seems like people who their industry and their vegan businesses are based on foods. You have very specific opinions. So when you went to form your sandwiches, did you know which flavors you were going after? Because seitan is tricky. It's a device. It's kind of a divisive. It's like cilantro. You know, it's like I find people love it or hate it. It's like it's a very tricky one. I think there are more players with like different like other based things like that. But how did you go in saying I wanted? Were you trying to achieve a specific like likeness to non-vegan sandwiches? Like, were you going after like a steak taste, or what made you choose the ingredients you chose?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before. So thank you. I honestly used to buy the West Soy seitan at Whole Foods, which was the closest grocery store to our house, and I would make my husband's lunches, and I love to play around in the kitchen and just make different recipes, and would make these sandwiches with the seitan and la bria baguette, and then I would saute some garlic and onions and olive oil and add some tomato and use veganese. And I just started out with that. That was our original sandwich. We had a woman making our seitan who's actually she is no longer, she bowed out pretty quickly, but she'd been vegan since the 70s, and so she made our initial batch of seitan for us. And then when she left, we had my sister taught me how to make seitan, because I didn't even know. When I started the company, I had no idea how to make seitan, which once again is yet another thing that I probably would have figured that out had I known more what I was doing. But I'm like, oh no, who needs to know how to make the food you're selling? You can figure that out on the way. So I did some test runs with test dinners with friends, with my family, and kind of settled on a few different recipes. And then we've actually had a lot of contributions from our team members over the years that would make suggestions, or we'll just be goofing around with different names. Clayton will come up with a food pun, and then I'll try to build a sandwich around that. And so it's just a lot of trial and error. And I personally really like seitan. It's really high protein. And we tried doing non gluten-free. We try to do like healthier sandwiches, and we are in the process of trying to make a healthier sandwich. But for the most part, I've just sort of unapologetically wanted to make really tasty vegan food. And I'm not trying to say it's healthy. I'm not trying to say it's gonna, you're gonna lose a bunch of weight, because that's not gonna happen. I'm living proof of that, especially after this whole quarantine thing and the gym closing and just eating sandwiches the whole time.
Yeah.
But it's really good. It's really tasty, and that was my main objective, is to make tasty vegan food to encourage people who thought of vegan food as bland and boring, and that was the roadblock for them in going vegan, is because they didn't like the taste. I wanted to make food that would change their minds, and that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love the unapologeticness too. That's excellent. I think you should stand where you're going to stand. Confirmed always. I tell my kids, like, take a stand and get behind it.
100%. Yeah.
I want to know, how did you what kind of varieties do you have? Let's get into, and with that, the growth. So when you started out, I know that we haven't talked about too much about it. You started out small and you've grown a little bit. So can you talk about where your company's at now and where it started out, and has the menu grown since then, or have you kept it nice and tight?
That's these are great questions. I listened to the podcast you did with Ingrid, and I'm like I said, I love your interview style, because these are unusual questions, and so thank you.
Yeah.
The interview, not the interview, sorry, rather the menu is some of the sandwiches are the same. We've developed. We try to keep at least one new sandwich every year or two. Being wholesale, it's a lot more of a process than if we were a restaurant, because everything has to be ODA approved label. So we have to make sure we can't just have that variation. Today's special, I mean, it's not directly to the public. So we have to follow all the FDA and ODA regulations to make sure that consumers know exactly what the product is. So that prevents us maybe from, like, when we had a food cart, which was short-lived and not very fun experiment. We don't have that flexibility. Yeah, I did not enjoy the food cart. So we did scrap the original Hail Chicken Seitan, the recipe that I based the company on, with the garlic and the onions, and we've kind of evolved over the years. Some of the recipes I've come up with. Again, some of them employees have made suggestions, or team members, or friends, and we try to really take people's suggestions to heart. But that is one thing I've learned, is that you can't please everybody, and so um, yeah, sometimes we try something, it doesn't work, so we have to scrap it. But that's a lot of hardship and waste if we do that.
Yeah.
So we really try to workshop our products before we get them to market. So we have about 10 sandwiches right now, and we're working on one new one, and that's pretty similar to what we've had all along.
Okay. And you've grown the business from it started out being smaller, and I know now that you have like full-time employees. What did it
Mhm.
start out as, and where are you at now?
Yeah, it started out, well, Corona's obviously changed all of that. The pandemic has
Right.
changed things quite a bit, unfortunately. But we started out in just a couple of stores called up Food Fight Vegan Grocery here in Portland. Called my friends that worked with the kitchen managers at a bar and said, "Look, you don't have any vegan options. This is a great bar to hang out at, but every time I come here, I end up getting way too drunk because there's nothing for me to eat."
Yeah.
Um, and so just called up a few people we knew and just started doing cold calls. And before the pandemic, we were in over 80 locations. Um, Now we are, oh, I don't even know off the top of my head, but we did just get into Safeway, which is huge. Only
Oh.
3 stores up here, but just having that foot in the door, I'm really working towards getting us at least West Coast by, I want to I want to say by the end of quarter 1 next year would be my goal. It was originally at the end of the calendar this year, but I think at the end of the first quarter, 2021, we're going to be up and down the West Coast is the goal. So we're in Safeway, New Seasons, Green Zebra, Market Choice, and those are all kind of regional chains. The grocery stores have saved our butt during the pandemic because a lot of our smaller customers either closed permanently or are closed temporarily and are unable to buy from us. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a godsend, right? Like, I think that
yeah.
there are a lot of people with well, at least a lot of my colleagues that had just a restaurant only are just struggling, even with
Hmm.
takeout, to kind of weather the storm of COVID-19.
Yeah.
I'm curious you dropped this little like threatening seed and I can't let it go. What happened with the food cart experience? It's like
Oh,
always this dream, every hipster, every millennial, like,
yes.
and I love the millennials. I'm not one, but I adore that generation just for their
Hmm.
audacity and how much change they put forward compared to the 5 generations before them. But I'm curious because it seems like the dream. In fact, I in my saddest hours think, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm just going to start a food cart, you know? And like I mean, I'm constantly thinking it would be like the
Don't do
life.
it.
So can
It's
you kind
so
of
much
talk a little
work. Oh my God. It's so much
what
work.
so could you like enumerate a little bit about like it seems like it would be the next logical step. I might even advise someone who is doing this vegan business and getting into stores like, "Oh, you got to do a food cart." It's like natural marketing. You know, you could be like, "And
You
we're
would
also
think
in
so.
stores." Okay, so what
But
happened there?
it's first of all, a totally different business model. Wholesale is one business model, food cart is another business model. Totally different business models. In fact, I set them up as separate businesses. We weren't prepared. We weren't prepared for the structure of the day, for one thing, how to give your employees clear instructions. When you're doing wholesale, it's here's your list of tasks, here's the sandwiches we're making for this many stores, here's the prep you need to do, and it's the same thing day in and day out. With the food cart, you don't have the guaranteed sales. With wholesale, you're only making what has already been ordered and is sold. Food cart, you have a whole the prep. You can sit there and prep everything and run the specials and do everything you're supposed to. And if there's no customers, there's no customers. And the food carts are at the whim and the mercy of weather and your neighbors. Nobody tells you if you're in a food cart pod that if your neighbor gets closed down for spilling gray water all over the concrete, that could negatively affect you. Or if there's a rat problem, how you're going to handle that because somebody hasn't cleaned their tank and there's always something breaking. Unless you can afford to buy like one of the $50,000 carts, there's always going to be something breaking. And it's really, some people have done really well at it. They're pretty saturated here in Portland right now. So it's just a different business model, and you have to be willing to be there all the time, honestly. And I was used to not having to be there, and we just couldn't afford to pay people what pay a full-time employee. So I would have to get up. My husband and I would get up, we'd go to the kitchen, we'd make the sandwiches, he would go to his other job, I would make deliveries, I'd rush to the food cart. I was always late, always behind, which that makes people really upset because if they show up at noon and you show up at 12:30 with no food, then you get a bad reputation that way. And then at the end of the day, we would do all the cleaning and closing and then have to do it all over the next day. And it was just killing us. It was exhausting. And so finally, after 6 months, we rented it to another vegan business, and the weight that came off of me, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I just
Yeah.
felt light and amazing for the first time in months. And so it just really wasn't for us. Some people really like it. I think part of that is, I honestly think part of the dream component of food carts is because it's a very TV friendly idea. You always see people on
Yeah.
TV always laugh about this, that somebody's starting a food cart and how easy it is. They're just up there making food and they got lines around the block. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So yes.
Well, you've fully opened my eyes. I no longer a backup career for this person. I that's it sounds it's right, and it's like having children. You have some people that are like, it's
Mhm.
going to be like having a puppy or a plant. It's like they get
No.
into the romanticism, and I'm like, take a class and just watch
Yes.
one for a day.
Oh my
you
God.
know,
I could barely handle having a dog. Currently the dog is over at the neighbor's house who likes hanging out over there better. Much less I can't imagine having children. Plants are fine. As long as I remember to water them, we're good. And food
yeah,
cart, and again, food cart, some people, if that's what they want to do, but you have to be willing to just be there. Just know you're going to be there all the time. And it's a really, you were
yeah,
saying with your friends with restaurants, unless you can sell alcohol out of your food carts, and that's why I'm really I understand how hard it must be for restaurants right now because they're used to those margins coming from their liquor and the sales of people sitting there. Food margins are pretty narrow. They're pretty narrow, and so I like having the safety and security of knowing that even though wholesale is even more, the margins are even slimmer than food carts. I like knowing that I have 200 sandwiches to make. We're going to make 200 sandwiches, and all of those are going to be paid for by our customers. They're getting
yeah.
ordered. That's what they're going to pay for. So, yeah,
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. I want to turn now to some rapid fire questions
sure.
that a lot of people write in for people in the food industry. We have a lot of people write in that say, over the tenure of your business, what are the top 3 mistakes that you made in regards to like the vegan community? People write in asking a lot about like, can you talk to people a lot about what you're talking about? The profit margins are very, very different for vegan
Mhm.
companies. I've spoken to a lot of vegan bakeries that are like, eggs, flour, and sugar, these things are like subsidized by and so when you milk and things
Yes.
like that, and when you take them away and
Yes.
you're substituting with soy milk and things that are twice as expensive and not
Hmm.
subsidized, and that's why the prices have to be higher. It's not this like shishi community, it's that you're trying to get that the return back. And so we
Yep.
have a lot of people that write in that ask if you had any like nuggets of wisdom or vegan hacks or something like that when starting and looking at ingredients when you started your business.
Oh, that's so ingredients specifically, you're asking,
No,
or
just
in
like
general?
any like little tricks that you came up with along the way, or did you just kind of have a formula that you worked out with? I think people are asking like, were there like you started making your own seitan? Was that
Sure.
due to the markup? Was it due to the ease? Was it due to the flavor? Like, how did you kind of make your
Yes.
ingredients and your price points make sense?
That's a great question. I think that you should definitely do the research. We can make our own seitan because the price point there. First of all, the price point, there was no comparison. Like we making our own versus buying it. It just didn't make sense to buy it um, pre-made. And also just the level of control you get over the flavor and consistency. That was really important to us. I would have
Right.
invested, now going back, if you are going to make a product like seitan, we had, either us or our staff needed the seitan by hand for years. I mean, for years. We finally just bit the bullet and bought a mixer. I cannot recommend doing your research and setting some money aside for something like that, because in retrospect, first of all, it's really hard to do by hand. You don't get the same level of consistency because it's really tiring. And then financially, the amount of employee labor versus the actual cost of the mixer, which is it has not only the depreciation factor, but it's tax deductible because you're buying a piece of equipment that you own rather than the labor hours that just kind of go, that money is just gone, which is, I'm glad
Mm.
to give people a job. But from a business perspective, so do your research on not only how you're going to make your product, if there's anything out there that can make it a little easier, because there's all kinds of kitchen gadgets that I didn't even think about. For example, we were making our cheese, and this is somebody who was shares our kitchen yesterday. Her blender broke, and she said, "Oh no, what am I going to do now?" I said, "Use our immersion blender." She said, "What's an immersion blender?" I didn't know what an immersion blender was either when I first started, but you have a commercial immersion blender. So rather than taking this big pot of liquid, dumping it slowly into a blender over and over, you just have a big immersion blender. So do your research on your equipment, because there's probably something out there that could save you a lot of time, and then you will have a piece of equipment rather than time and money just out the door.
Yeah.
As far as the actual ingredients go, do your research on what company you're buying from. One of our first companies I went through, and I'm not going to name them because I don't necessarily want to badmouth anybody. They're huge national companies, so I doubt they care. But that was just a company that had been used in the several kitchens I worked in. So I called them, and that's who we used. And I didn't. Well, I was just gonna. Well, I'm not going to say it. But do your research, because there are companies out there where the salespeople make their money by quoting you one price and then slowly week over week adding a few pennies onto whatever you're buying. And this was what happened with, like, for example, black pepper started out being $25. I don't remember the increments, like 5 pounds or whatever. And then when we left this company, it was $99. They just kept adding more and more money on. So that's where they make their commission. So really do your research. There are reputable local companies out there. Right now we work with Charlie's. The prices are up, but it's because of the
Mm-hmm.
wildfires. They've sent us photos. They said, look, we are not raising your prices because we're trying to be jerks. This is where your lettuce comes from. And it was devastating to look at, this charred field. And that was not an intentional pun, by the way. Um, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, so really do your research on where you're getting your produce and make the decision whether or not you want to spend that extra money for, like, organic tomatoes, or we all along, like, we use brown sugar. Right away, we use organic brown sugar because we want to make sure that it's vegan, and we know that you were getting a vegan product, because a lot of traditional sugars are made with bone char. So just make sure you really do your research, especially if you haven't been a vegan for a long time. And I'm still kind of shocked. I'll still forget and buy something, with honey in it or whatever, just because I didn't realize, like, one kind of
Yeah.
mate had honey in it. So just do your research, not only on your companies you're purchasing from, and if you have the option of working with a vegan company, I highly recommend it. There's a company here called Earthly Gourmet, 100% vegan, and I, I will pay whatever their prices are, because I know they treat their employees well. They've loaned us money
Mm.
in the past. They have a merchant fund. They're part of the community. They're great people, and they're vegan. And I know that they've done the research. Like, their palm oil, they actually went down to Brazil. I think it was Brazil, and looked at the farm and where the palm oil came from to make sure that it was ethical. So I know that if I'm getting a
Nice.
product from them, that it's something that my values align with. So money doesn't matter. If you can do something a little cheaper, like gloves, gloves are gloves, I'm going to buy the cheaper gloves. So just pick your
Right.
battles on the price.
That's cool. Yeah, I like those pieces of advice. People wrote
Thanks.
in and asked if there are any alliances or partnerships that you have found over the past tenure of your company that were useful. And you kind of touched on this earlier, that you called up people that you knew and different things. But have you found specific vegan alliances or organizations you belong to that proved to be uniquely useful as you kind of started your path?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm really lucky. We're right up the road from Tofurkey, so I emailed Seth Tibbett,
Oh, wow.
right when like the first year in business, and said I need a mentor, and now we're friends, and he's a really great guy. So reach out to leaders in the vegan business community. They're people are really great. They want to help. Vegans want to help, and so if you have a company that you really admire, for example, we just had a call with some of the folks from No Evil Foods, Mike and Cedra, and they gave us a lot of really good advice, that you would think I would have known by now, but it was just some pieces of information that I wasn't quite clicking with yet. So reach out, find a company you like, and reach out to the founders. Chances are they'll want to help you. Plant-based Food Association has been on my list of organizations to join for a long time. I haven't done it yet. This was going to be the year, and then with the downturn because of the pandemic. Um, but I know they have a lot of great connections. And then just really making friends with other that would be my number one piece. I should have led with this. My number one piece of advice is, I don't view other vegan businesses as competitors. We are all in the same boat. We have the same mission. Even if you
Yeah.
set up a vegan sandwich shop next to me, you are not my competitor. You are trying to save animals along with me, and you're going to have a lot easier time making friends with those people and reaching out to them and saying, hey, let's do a collaboration, or hey, how can I help you? And I've done that with vegan businesses before in the past. Said, hey, I see you're running a GoFundMe, and not to be a good jerk, but it's kind of all over the place. Here, can I offer you some advice on how to focus up a little bit so you can make your
Yeah.
campaign that you're putting out to the world less scattered and more viable? So really, that would make friends with your community. And if you have a chance to donate to your local you're in San Diego, so it's Carly and oh my gosh, Mr. and Mrs. Vegan in San Diego, Carly and Josh. Oh, sorry, Josh, Carly and Josh, and they run a great. Is it San Diego Veg Association? Is that what the name
Yeah.
of the?
I
the
feel like I always butcher those. There's so many like VegFest, Veg this, that like I don't know, but I have heard their names. I know of them.
and
Yeah.
they're great. And so that you guys have a lot of resources down there, and there's more and more even in like the tiny towns throughout the back in the day when like in the 90s and late 80s, you were really going more for the health, the like granola hip. Then right now there's every subsect of vegan. Like I one night just couldn't sleep, so I searched vegan metalhead hashtag on Instagram, and now I'm friends with a woman in Turkey who's a vegan metalhead, and we actually got to go visit her a couple years ago. Um,
Excellent.
so really
Excellent.
just reach out to your people because they're out there, and especially with the internet, you can find people all over the world. But in your local community, reach out, make friends, have potlucks when all this is
Yeah.
over, and hug each other as much as you can when it's all over, which hopefully will be soon.
I know. Catch up on all that contact. I know.
Yes.
All right. So we have some kind of blanket questions that people write in. I'd love to get your feedback on. What are the top misconceptions over the past, few decades that you feel are the top tiers of the ones that about veganism that you still run into? And I love this because Portland is kind of this woke place, and I'd be
Yeah.
interested to know, what you still feel like the top three misconceptions about veganism or being a vegan are.
Okay. Number one is the healthy thing. That if you're vegan, you're either malnourished or you're skinny or you can't build muscle. I'm not even going to say healthy. I'm going to say that vegans have a certain look physically, and that's ridiculous. It's a wide population of people. There's thin vegans, there's fat vegans, there's ripped vegans, there's a black vegans, there's white vegans. So to say that there's a blanket look of a vegan is still a pretty archaic but prevalent misconception. Second of all, that vegan food tastes bad, and that one still blows my mind. But I still, to this day, I had a conversation with someone yesterday who said that there is no way they would ever quote unquote eat vegan. And I'm like, you've eaten vegetables before at some point in your life, right? You haven't been eating, dead animals exclusively for your entire like 40 years on the planet. But obviously, I didn't say this because I'm talking to a customer and being polite is paramount. But uh,
Mhm.
the fact that people think that vegan food equals boring and bad, that's still shocking to me, especially in
Yeah.
Portland, Oregon, where you can get any kind of vegan food you want and it's all amazing. And thirdly of all, I'm gonna have to think about that one for a second. Um, that veganism isn't a sustainable, that veganism is for dabbling but not really sustainable. I feel like it's a very sustainable lifestyle that you can be. Again, I've been vegan for, I can't imagine going back to eating meat, but that veganism is something you maybe play around with as a teenager or in college, and then you go back to eating quote unquote
Yeah.
normally. And that's not, that still kind of shocks me too, that people don't think of it as a long-term commitment and as part of who they are. So
Yeah,
that would be my
absolutely.
top three. Yeah.
We have a lot of people that write in wondering where you personally get like your vegan news or also things about like, are there personalities, these micro influencers and people like that? Do you personally follow people, vegans?
Mm.
And where do you get your vegan news? Is there a news source site? There's a ton out there, a bunch of vegan magazines, online
Mm.
magazines, and things like that. But do you have any major sites that you like to hit for your sources, or is it all over the board?
It's really all over the board. I follow I'm obviously Veg News and Live Kindly and some of those, and some of the big old school news sources are good for breaking news, but I also like a lot of vegan bloggers, Robert Cheek with Vegan Bodybuilding and Fitness. Actually went to high school and I'm friends with his sister. Um and Sweet Simple Vegan and Conscious Chris, they're up here. They're great. Um oh my gosh, I know I'm I'm on the spot a little bit because I know I'm going to forget a ton of people and then be kicking myself later. So if I send
No,
you a
you're
whole list of
fine.
names, just include them, please. Um,
Gotcha.
and there's just such a variety of different vegan influencers and sources of vegan information out there. So I definitely am sort of all over the board. I actually stay off Twitter. I quite a bit. You mentioned Twitter at the beginning of the podcast, and I have a hard time with Twitter because there's a lot of the sensitive content, the undercover content. Like I follow a lot of the Mercy for Animals accounts, and I have to sort of protect myself. I've had days where I'll see even a snippet of what goes on at a factory farm and literally just feel wrecked the rest of the day. So I try to
Yeah.
personally stick with the more positive side of it because I'm never going to be able to have the emotional energy to keep fighting the good fight if I'm feeling just crushed thinking about all the evils of the world. So I try to stick with the sort of happy food sites for me personally, but it's all relevant.
Yeah, there's a lot of dialogue there, and that's a whole nother podcast. But I've actually
Mhm.
kind of climbed into that conversation with the majority of guests that I have on, and it's really divisive. And there are a lot of, I personally become catatonic if I'm faced with too many of those
Mhm.
images. I just never needed them to know that the humane path was the right one. And so if I see
Yes,
too many
yes,
of them, and
yes.
I realize there's the validity of needing them, so that there's proof, and all of that is paramount. And and Ingrid's a
Mhm.
warrior of those, and PETA does such a good
Amazing.
job. But I personally become, as you said, I become immobilized, like to the point where I'm not able to fight another day.
Mhm.
And so I think that's an interesting kind of, there was an author that wrote, Claire Mann, I think, Vistopia, and it's this,
Mhm.
the emotional trajectory of the vegan, like the actual humane suffering that happens when they become vegan. And so I think it's really interesting. I think it's a conversation a lot of vegans begin having with themselves as to what the quota that they can follow. I follow a lot of like just really staunch news vegan sites because of that, because the imagery
Yeah.
and things like that really tend to. But again, like you're saying, it's valid, just not for the own person. Again, that's a whole nother topic we could do another one about, and
Yeah.
perhaps we ought to.
Yeah.
Um, what are some of, so a lot of people want to know where you see the vegan, you're on the forefront of a movement, a lot of people, non-vegans included. There's a whole bunch of investment funds and VC funds like directly dedicated solely for vegan companies. It's
Yeah.
it's being acknowledged and accepted before COVID even as this newcomer to the scene, and it was building traction. It went from being like a cultish term to
Mhm.
acceptable to healthy, and now it's becoming avant-garde and where everyone should invest their money. And with
Mhm.
COVID, it's like gone on to I know, and it's gone on to steroids. And there's been a lot of projection from vegans and non-vegans, from finances to emotions, that it's going to be like this very, very prevalent form of conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering how you personally see it, if you agree with some of that, and where you think the next 5 years of veganism will be, for the world, for you personally, and for your company.
I am an optimist. So I believe I have to be an optimist. Being vegan this long, you need to keep being an optimist. I believe that it's going to again, it's going to be more and more mainstream. I sincerely hope that it doesn't that people don't look at veganism as a diet because that means it could flame out like low carb or Atkins
Yeah.
or any of the low fat or any of the diet trends that you see that sort of get come in waves and then go away. That's why it's so important to look at veganism as as a lifestyle and a moral imperative rather than simply a diet because that allows people cheat on their diets all the time, but you don't cheat on your morals, or you shouldn't, or you don't consciously on a regular basis, I should say. We all cheat occasionally, but um, so the idea in 5 years, I believe our company is going to be national. That is my goal. I'm going to make it happen. Our company is going to be national, so we can have grab and go vegan sandwiches at every grocery store throughout the company or throughout the country. You can walk in and just grab a sandwich. I believe veganism is going to be, it's already doubled from the percentage of like 1% of the country being vegan to like 3. Doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a big jump. It's moving the needle forward a lot. And so if we can continue to double our numbers and grow veganism exponentially, I think in 5 years we can. I'm going to optimistically say 10% of the country will be mostly vegan. I'm going to allow some wiggle room here for that definition, but I want to say mostly vegan. People who eat they might cheat on honey or whatever, but they're, for the most part, they're following a vegan lifestyle.
Yeah.
I un pessimistically, I don't think the world will ever be entirely vegan. I want to believe that, and I rarely say that out loud, but I honestly don't see certain swaths of the population ever getting on board with the fact that they don't believe that animals aren't ours. A lot of people believe that the earth is ours, that animals are ours, and with that kind of rights of property and ownership, they don't have the ethical basis for giving up meat. And compounded with the dietary fallacy that you need meat to live and you're going to die of protein deficiency if you don't eat it. I don't think everyone will go vegan, but I'm going to say in 5 years, if we can even have 10% of the population, what would we're at 300 million right now, so 10% would be 30 million. So I feel good about that. And if we could even get at 1% of those people eating a Snackrilege sandwich at least once a week, man, we're in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Here.
Thank
I
you.
agree with you on the speciesism as well. I think that there is a certain amount of people, and that's going to take some time to kind of matriculate in to the younger generations that, indeed, we are not entitled to everything that's in front of us. It's such a privileged, weird white person thing as well. I feel like, and
So
maybe I'm
bad.
wrong, but
No.
it's so ingrained in that culture of like mine.
Yes. And what you were saying about
Yes,
millennials, though, speaks to that. I do feel like millennials don't have that attitude as much. Um,
yeah,
and so that's really encouraging. And I feel like they're more open to bucking the sort of conventional trends when it comes to gender and uh, diet and lifestyle. And so I think you're absolutely right about the millennials. So we got a lot of hope pinned on the young people. You guys got this. You're okay.
yeah, I completely agree. And the ones after that, Gen Z, Gen
Yeah.
I, whatever it's going to be called.
Hmm.
I've seen more change within those generations by them just up and saying, no, we refuse your terms. And I
Hmm.
think that's what angered a lot of the older generations who weren't willing to kind of look at it. But there's been more political movement with those generations than in, like I said, like the past four before them, arguably even like the 70s. There's
Hmm.
been more shifting and change with those kinds of, and they have an obstinate way of doing it, but I'm down because the responsibility and the transparency that they're pushing, like, sign me up.
Yay,
So,
absolutely good for you.
yeah.
I mean, that's that had that support and encouragement from I don't want to say older generations because that makes me feel like I'm, super gray haired right now, but which I diet, so I'm not. But I think it's really great that you have that
Yeah.
level of support and articulate that support because you everybody people need to know that they have generational acceptance. And so to sort
Yeah.
of provide that I think is really cool. So good job.
Absolutely. And I'm like you, I'm an optimist, and I love that you're leaving us on that note. I believe that there's going to be good things. There's always going to be bad things, but we should also include the fact that there's going to be good things in our future, particularly with
Yeah.
humanitarian and animals and the alleviation of suffering and things like that. Rosalind, we're out of time, but thank you so
Thanks.
much for coming on. I really do appreciate your
Thank
time. I know you're
you.
busy, and I really appreciate it.
You too. Thanks for having me, Patricia. Kathleen, thank you so much. Really, truly an honor to be on here today, and chatting with you was really fun. Call me up anytime. Let's just keep this conversation going. And
Yes.
if we make it to San Diego, I'll definitely stop by and say hi. Send me your address. I can send you a sandwich.
Oh, 1,000%. I will be doing that. And you have to come by as soon as COVID's over. And I'll go bop into Portland as well someday. For
Awesome.
everyone listening, we've been speaking with Rosalind McCallard. She's the founder of Snackrilege. You can find out more on her website, www.snackrilege.com. And from all of us at Patricia Kathleen Podcast, thanks for listening. Remember to be responsible, practice compassion, and always bet on yourself. Sluncha.